Look, I know you just want some commercial and screen time of Blondie here. It's okay. I understand. Great music, whatever. The conversation goes back to saying that I'm the veteran that makes everybody looks like I'm the veteran that looks like I have a screw loose or something of that nature. Um, I'm not the guy on TikTok talking, or rather speaking about my combat experience and PTSD and the resulting of that, because I don't have any of that. I'm also not the guy recording myself making jokes about running around nude while intoxicated in some whatever town that person happened to have been running around in. I'm not the guy who was talking about, or rather, making videos about rectum play with somebody else, some other human being, or making hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of TikToks where you reference playing with your nether regions and your genitals in some kind of weird, perverse way, in some kind of weird nut job way. Like none of this stuff is me. So if you're looking at me as one of the veterans with something wrong with their head because stuff I've said on the internet, I'll tell you right now, like some of that stuff, I'll tell you to your face. It's like, yes, I do believe home intruders should be dealt with lethal force. I do agree with using lethal force in most of these situations. I do think a lot of our problems result from the fact that we no longer have a stringent death penalty in the United States. Like, we just don't. We don't execute anywhere near the number of people we used to, and that is not a deterrent anymore. It's not a deterrent because, some guy will think he just 23andMe himself and sit in solitary or maximum security for the rest of his life. I don't know what kind of person would think that's an okay solution to, being targeted by gangs and stuff. It isn't a solution. The solution is to just start arresting people involved with gangs and not let these people get involved with confidential informant programs, because reasons are obvious. If you let somebody like, a gang leader being involved with the government where he's taking money from the law enforcement or something of that nature to snitch on people, at that point you have to understand the only people he's going to snitch out are his competition. So you're going to make the entire city one-sided, like, very quickly. So if you understand how the confidential informant program works, then you understand that the illegals and the Mexican gangs and all that stuff dominate the informant program. So if you see somebody's being snitched on, it's probably somebody who's, pro deportation of that nature. Is why whenever somebody in law enforcement tells me, oh, so-and-so told me this, that, and about somebody else, and I'm just like, I don't believe anything you say. Nothing I hear from you is true. Literally nothing that comes out of your mouth is true. Nothing that they tell you is true, because they have an incentive to lie. They have an incentive to distort the truth so they can maintain their control on a region that they don't belong in, because that's how the illegals took over all these cities, was the CI programs in every city. So now we have gangs operated and controlled by Mexican cartels, because that's why they're here, is to distribute cocaine and whatever else. I don't know what I don't know what they sell. Okay, I don't know what gangs sell in the United States. I don't know what kind of drugs are the in thing right now, because all of my information comes from Breaking Bad, and that's the only movie I know of. And I hear there's a lot of fentanyl going around. I don't know. I'm not involved with this stuff because I'm in my 40s and I don't do drugs. I sit in front of my computer and work on software all day. So I don't have any connection to any of this stuff. So I can't really speak emphatically and factually on this subject. If we're going to have a conversation about machine learning or something, then yeah, I can speak about that all day. But, on this subject, it's just this brain dead mentality about having a CI system where you have illegals coming in, establishing themselves, getting involved with the informant network so they can cut out the competition and then take over entire cities. And we've seen it. We've seen it happen. We've seen it happen in more than one place. And we see them also at the end. They end up handing it over to Chinese comptrollers working for Chinese intelligence, because lo and behold, Chinese intelligence is involved with elected positions in the United States. Many of our municipalities are deeply infiltrated by Chinese intelligence. It's not even funny. It is embarrassingly so. And I'm not calling out Chinese people saying, oh, you're involved in Chinese intelligence. I'm just saying many of them are. Many people are deeply tied into either some kind of Chinese intelligence, some sort of Indian intelligence. And of course, everybody makes deals with Israel because Israel has money. They want people to inform on them. They want backdoors into platforms and all this other stuff. So the dirty money flows around and all this fraud happens. And why did we not know about this fraud for so long? Well, we did. And see, that's the problem. Like I said, we knew this fraud was going on, but the governments of these cities and these states are so unbelievably compromised by gangs, foreign intelligence agencies, and drug money that they just, that nobody was doing anything. As far as understanding, like, why all this fraud money just upped and disappeared, you have to understand these organizations, they take it. I'm going to lay this out real quick to you. So I've done a lot of analysis work on this because in the machine learning world, you end up doing a lot of data work, and I've seen a lot of the data, unfortunately. And how they work is they have layers. So on the bottom layer, like if they're doing fraud out of Medicaid and Medicare, or like the layering center, stuff like that, when they take the money, they wash it through and they buy stuff, they buy assets. And then when they offload the assets, all this other stuff, sometimes they offload the assets, sometimes they just shuffle the money around and push it and launder it and run it through a system so that they can purchase illicit assets, or, move it from one organization to another, because it's not just one organization. The Somalis are only one organized group. There's organized groups of every nationality, including the cartels, Mexican cartels, and South American cartels. And so when they wash the money, they'll end up buying like illicit substance for the money that they don't wash. What they skim off, and the illicit substance goes to profit. And this basically, they just keep passing the money around within the illegality. And then that's how all these things work. And it's just like, you have to understand the money for the fraud was probably used to purchase drugs from south of the border that was further imported, because they don't keep their money in one place. They keep the money moving, because the only way to make money is to move the money. That's the only way. And so you have all this illicit money going back and forth all over the place, and it just acts like a giant sponge sucking up all the loose liquidity within the economy. And then once you examine where all this ended up going, you see that they were taking the cash at the end of the day and removing it from the country, which is why nobody can get a loan. No Americans can do anything, because it was just on top of the already massive remittances that we have with illegal immigrants and the other stuff. It was just the illicit economy was just soaking up all this excess liquidity and removing it from the equation, which is why we've been in a very deep recession and depression, is because we're looking at the situation where nobody can move anything because there's no liquidity. And liquidity is the ability to loan something out because you have a principle by which you can loan against. And if we don't have that, like we don't have all that liquidity, and this is year on year, this has been going on for decades. So all that money just gets soaked up and pushed out of the country, and it just depletes everything in the United States. And the only way to resolve this is for the banks and the Federal Reserve System to continually print more money and inject more liquidity in order to keep it going. And one of the reasons why we had QE was because of this. We had QE because there wasn't enough liquidity. Why did we have the housing collapse? Because they soaked up everything and sent it to China and sent it to Iraq. And all this debt just soaked up everything, and all these fraudsters and all these scams. We were seeing massive drug hauls, massive busts during this period. Right before, all the way right up until the collapse. When the collapse happened, just everything stopped. Like everything stopped for like a year. There was no liquidity anywhere, so there were no drugs moving, none of that stuff, because all the fraud stopped. All the laundering stopped. So now you understand with QE, honestly, QE was probably the most honest the economy's been with QE, because none of that money was getting effectively laundered by the black market. It was just being moved around in the white market through the bond window. And so you had this situation where the economy was still afloat. Unfortunately, it was all debt, but none of it was being removed in remittances and flown out of the country for a good year. And we saw a huge, massive leap in productivity. And then we started seeing the stagnation, the stagflation, the recession, and then all this other stuff reappear again right after that. So you have to understand, like, these criminal organizations are a massive detriment to the economy, and you're basically funding them to exist, and they're paying the law enforcement community, not necessarily directly, but paying the law enforcement community in circular fashion on their right to exist by bribing them. And long story short, there are too many people buying too many assets from a foreign country, and too much money is leaving the United States. So it just makes the problem even worse. And if you ever wonder why nothing ever gets any better, it's because, well, nobody has any idea where all the money went. And so what are you going to do? Can't do anything. So instead of arguing with everybody about everything, I don't know, stop gaslighting me about stuff that clearly you weren't thinking about. I've seen a lot of data on this. It's not pretty. It's very not pretty. It's not a pretty situation. But whatever. You can fix it if you want. I am not a part of the conversation because, like you said, I have no authority.